Monday mornings in Astoria always begin with a thin layer of fog clinging to the workshop windows and the distant sound of waves breaking against the shore. I was bent over the wooden table, double-checking a few price quotes for clients that week. The scratch of my pen on paper blended with the soft ticking of the wall clock. Luke walked in, his hair still damp from a shower, backpack slung over one shoulder. "Dad," he said, his voice hesitant but with a hint of anticipation. "This month we pay the first semester's tuition for Oregon State, right?" I looked up and nodded. "Yes, I plan to transfer it this afternoon, just in time before the deadline." He smiled, but I saw something in his eyes that held more expectation than usual. I turned toward the laptop in the corner of the desk and logged into the bank account, something I always did before making any large transfer. The screen appeared, and I blinked several times as if my eyes had played a trick on me. The balance of the college fund, the account I had been painstakingly adding to for 17 years, showed a perfectly round number: 0. I sat up straight, my breath catching. My hands suddenly felt heavy as I moved the cursor to check the transaction history. There was no mistake. $82,000 had vanished in a single transfer just 3 days ago. Behind me, Luke said something about his morning class, but his voice faded into the background, replaced by a low hum like the sound of steam trapped in a pipe. I logged out, then logged back in, as if the second time might produce a different result. It was still 0. "Are you all right, Dad?" Luke asked. I forced a smile and closed the laptop. "It's fine, son. I'll check it again later." "You should get going or you'll be late." He nodded, believing me far more easily than I had expected, then left the workshop. As the door clicked shut, I leaned back in the chair, pressing my hands to my forehead. It felt like discovering a water main had burst under the foundation, unseen but certain, silently undermining everything above it. Recent memories returned like scattered film clips. Paula, my wife, often went out to meet clients at odd hours, mid-afternoon or just before dinner. The explanation sounded reasonable enough. She worked as a freelance accountant and sometimes needed to meet in person to sign documents. But in the past few weeks, the frequency had increased. There were more new clothes in her closet, and the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume lingered in the hallway each time she passed. I had never been a suspicious man. Plumbing teaches you that sometimes a hiss or a thud in the pipes does not always mean disaster. It could just be a loose valve. But a 0 balance in my son's account was not an innocent hiss. I opened the transaction history again. The recent withdrawals were all substantial, ranging from several thousand to tens of thousands, each occurring during the day while I was buried in repair work miles away. The location of the withdrawals was not our local bank, but a branch in Seaside, the same place Paula once mentioned, going to meet an old friend. A chill ran the length of my spine. There are leaks you cannot hear, only feel when you place your hand against the pipe and sense the cold water seeping through. Now I felt something colder, an abnormal current running through my own family. I pulled my chair closer to the desk, took out the old work notebook I used for job notes, and began writing down a timeline. Dates of the withdrawals, the amounts, and the locations. My mind worked the way it did when tracing a hidden pipe. Patient, meticulous, leaving nothing unmarked. Outside, the fog was beginning to lift, revealing Astoria's main street. People walked, shops opened, and no one knew that in a small workshop at the edge of town, a plumber had just discovered that the financial lifeline of his family had been drilled through, and the one holding the drill might be living under the same roof. If you are reading this, I want to know where in the world you are. Leave a comment, because things like this do not happen only in Oregon. They can happen anywhere, to anyone who trusts the wrong person. When I looked at the empty 0 on the computer screen this morning, I did not just see missing money. I saw a part of my life pulled from memory and thrown into the void. 25 years of marriage, once anchored to what I believed was solid, the house we repaired with our own hands, the workshop I built from the ground up, and most of all, our family, now felt as fragile as an old corroded pipe I had failed to replace in time. I met Paula in the summer of 1997 in a small building supply store by the Columbia River. Back then, I was just starting, with nothing but an old truck, a set of tools, and a handful of small contracts. Paula worked the register, her hair tied high, her eyes bright, speaking with a quick, lively manner. I was not thinking far ahead at the time, only noticing a young woman smiling at me as I carried a length of PVC pipe twice her height. But with each visit to the store, we spoke a little more about the weather, the houses along the coast, and the dream of having a place of our own. We married the following autumn in a small church, followed by a buffet at the community hall. We had no real money, but we had youth and persistence. I worked all day, took emergency repair calls at night, while Paula did accounting for the largest grocery store in town. We rented an old wooden house that turned bitterly cold in the winter, but at the time, we never complained. In 2005, Luke was born. I still remember the night I carried him home from the hospital, setting his tiny crib beside our bed and feeling as if a new valve had just been added to my life, one that let in both responsibility and joy in equal measure. Paula and I sat down to calculate, deciding to open a dedicated savings account for his education. It was not much, only about $200 a month, but I promised myself I would never skip a payment. The early years were hard but meaningful. I worked 6 days a week, sometimes leaving before the sun rose and returning after the streets had gone dark. Paula kept her part-time accounting work while caring for Luke and managing our expenses. Every time we added to Luke's fund, we smiled, picturing him in a cap and gown, walking across the stage to accept his diploma. The house we bought when Luke turned 6 was not big, but it was solid. I replaced the entire plumbing system myself. Paula repainted the living room, and Luke ran around with a plastic hammer in his hand, pretending to help his dad. Summer evenings were spent on the porch, eating grilled bread and listening to the distant waves. But change came, not overnight, but gradually, like a slow leak in a pipe. Around 2016, I noticed Paula taking part less in family evenings. She would say she needed to work late or meet an urgent client, returning home with a faint trace of new perfume. When I asked, she said she simply wanted to change, that a woman needed to take care of herself. I did not argue. After all her years of work, I thought she deserved to treat herself. The changes were not only in her appearance. Her spending shifted as well. Once meticulous in tracking every expense, she now buys luxury handbags, Italian shoes, and expensive watches. When I asked about the gift, she called it an investment in her image. Clients trusted an accountant who dressed well. At the time, I believed our marriage was simply in a new phase, that Paula was still the same woman who once counted every dollar going into our son's fund. I did not want to pry, did not want to turn into the suspicious kind. Perhaps it was that very trust that blinded me. The last time we deposited money together into Luke's fund was on his 16th birthday. We stood at the bank counter, signing the slip, and Paula joked that in 2 more years he could use it to buy an old truck like mine. I laughed, not knowing that a year later, that money would be drained completely by someone else. My work remained steady. The plumbing shop was small but sustained by loyal customers. I taught Luke a few basics: how to shut off a valve when there's a leak, how to use a pipe wrench, and most importantly, how to trace the cause before attempting a repair. I wanted him to understand that every problem has a source, and finding that source is already halfway to the solution. I did not realize those lessons would come back to haunt me. As for Paula, she was away from home more often. Some nights I sat on the porch watching the neighbors' lights go out one by one, still not hearing the sound of her car returning. When I called, she said she was wrapping up a meeting or helping a client with paperwork. Her voice hurried, as if afraid I would ask for details. I began to feel a pane of frosted glass between us. We could see each other's outlines but could no longer touch. There were no more dinners filled with talk of plans, no more laughter when Luke told a school story. Only polite exchanges and stretches of silence. By then, Luke's college fund was still intact. I kept adding to it every month, treating it like replacing a section of pipe, a routine but necessary act to keep the system sound. Paula no longer discussed it, and if I mentioned it, she would simply murmur and change the subject. When Luke entered his senior year of high school, I spoke more about college choices, tuition, and dorms. My son was excited. Paula was indifferent. She said there was no need to rush, that everything would be fine, without explaining further. I mistook it for confidence. only later realizing it was a sign she already had another plan. Small changes, added together, had become a wide gap, but I did not expect that gap to be filled by someone else. That person, as I would learn later, did not just take my wife. He took my son's future. As I sit here remembering the early years we built together, I ask myself if Paula was ever truly happy or if she had always been waiting for a chance to leave. I once believed we were like the plumbing systems I installed. Old perhaps, but long-lasting if cared for. I learned that once someone decides to drill a hole into it, no matter how tightly you turn the fittings, the water will always find a way out. I do not know the exact moment our marriage went cold. I only know it is no longer the safe place it once was. And the college fund, the symbol of shared dreams and effort, is now nothing more than an empty balance on a screen. But a plumber does not quit just because the water is flooding. He finds the leak, shuts the valve, and starts the repair. I knew I would have to do the same, not only to recover the money that was gone, but to keep my son's respect. I waited until that evening to speak to Paula. Luke had gone upstairs, his door closed, music drifting down through the gap in the staircase. Paula was at the dining table with a glass of red wine and her phone in front of her. She scrolled with one finger, completely absorbed in her world. "I want to talk," I began, keeping my voice steady. She looked up with a faint smile. "About what?" "Luke's account. Where is the money?" The smile disappeared. She set the glass down, avoiding my eyes. "You checked already. $82,000. All of it. Explain." Paula sighed and leaned back in her chair. "I invested it. Someone I know had a rare opportunity, guaranteed to double in just a few months. I wanted it to be a surprise for the whole family." I stared at her. "Someone you know, who? And why did you not talk to me before withdrawing every dollar we had saved for our son?" She brushed her hair back, her tone tinged with irritation. "Because you would have said no. You are always too cautious. I know a good opportunity when I see it." I wanted to shout, but my trade had taught me patience. Plumbing teaches you that if you slam a stuck valve, you will only break it entirely. "The name," I asked again. "His name is Victor. Victor Hayes. He is in real estate. Very successful." The name meant nothing to me in that moment, except for the chill that ran down my spine. I said nothing else, just nodded and carried her glass to the sink. 3 days later, I got a job repairing a line at a cafe on Main Street. While lying under the sink, wrench in hand, I overheard a conversation at a nearby table. "Have you heard? Victor Hayes is selling off more lots down south of town. I thought he got sued last time for that bogus development in Tillamook. Yeah, that was a big mess, but somehow he got out of it. He is a sly one." The name Victor cut through the hiss of the espresso machine and the clink of cups. I stayed still, my heart beat louder than the flow of water. At the counter, I casually asked the waitress, "Who is this Victor Hayes they were talking about?" She shrugged. "Real estate broker, well known but with a reputation. That is all I know." That night, scrolling through Facebook, I stumbled across a post from someone I did not know. A group photo taken on an empty lot, a sign behind them reading Seaside Shores Residential Project. Invest in the future. In the middle of the group was Paula, wearing a new cream coat, her hair neatly tied back, smiling. Beside her stood a tall man with salt and pepper hair in a tailored suit, his hand lightly on her back. Without question, Victor Hayes. I zoomed in and read the comments. Someone had written, "Victor and his team are launching Phase 2, a great chance for investors." No one mentioned the lawsuits. I stared at that picture for a long time. It was not romantic in the traditional sense, but their closeness was obvious. More importantly, it told me Paula was not just investing in a project. She was investing in a person. From that day, I began to watch quietly. When Paula left her handbag on the chair, I caught sight of a receipt from an upscale seafood restaurant in Seaside, a place we had never gone together. In the dining room drawer, I found a hotel receipt for a double room booked under P. Morley, paid with a card belonging to V. Hayes. I am not a detective, but a plumber knows how to trace a line. Every pipe leads back to a source. Every expense leads back to a story. I began checking the credit card statements Paula left on the table. Alongside the usual charges, there were new ones. A men's designer clothing store, a short cruise, and several payments to a law office in Portland. One night, while Paula was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the table. The lock screen lit up with the name Victor H. and the message, "Let's close the deal this weekend. Everything is ready." I did not touch it, but the image of that text burned itself into my mind. Suspicion had become near certainty, but I said nothing. In this line of work, when you see a leak, you do not shut off the valve until you know exactly how the system runs. You track it, mark it, and find the connection. I created a new email account under a false name and began searching for information on Victor Hayes. Old articles came up. The 2018 Tillamook lawsuit over a land deal without permits, warnings on real estate forums, and complaints from clients who lost their deposits. The more I read, and the clearer the pattern became. Victor targeted people with idle money but little investment experience, promised high returns, then disappeared before any project came to life. I wondered why, if he had been sued before, he was still in business. Maybe because no one gathered enough evidence, or because victims avoided legal trouble. But I was different. I was used to fixing problems at the root. A week later, with Luke asleep upstairs, I sat alone in the kitchen, spreading out everything I had gathered. Printed receipts, screenshots from Facebook, hotel bills, and notes on the large withdrawals. I sorted them into groups, like separating fittings on a workbench: financial evidence, photographic evidence, personal connections. In every category, the name Victor Hayes appeared over and over, and beside it was the shadow of Paula. I knew I was stepping into a new phase. This was no longer just about money. This was a double betrayal, of a marriage and of a son. And I, a 55-year-old plumber, would have to dismantle this corroded system piece by piece. The opportunity came unexpectedly, like searching endlessly for a leak in a plumbing system, and suddenly hearing the faint sound of water seeping right beneath your feet. One Thursday morning, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. The man on the line introduced himself as the manager of a new office building by the river. He said they were having an issue with water pressure on the third floor and needed a plumber urgently. I jotted down the address, thinking little of it, until he added, "The third floor houses the offices of Hayes and Partners Real Estate." I instantly recognized the name, and in that moment felt the blood rush to my face. Victor Hayes. I accepted without hesitation, keeping my voice calm. After hanging up, I went into the workshop, opened the metal cabinet, and pulled out a small box I had kept for years. A set of mini cameras and wireless microphones Luke had once bought for a school science project. They worked so well that I had always thought someday I might use them for something more serious. That day had come. When I arrived at the building, the manager took me up to the third floor. The Hayes and Partners office looked more luxurious than I had imagined. Large glass doors, polished wood floors, a reception desk with fresh flowers. A young employee led me to the utility room at the end of the hallway. "The water line is clogged here," he said, then left. I crouched down to inspect it, working while keeping an eye on the hallway. Once I was sure no one was watching, I attached the mini camera to the corner of the utility cabinet. From there, it had a clear view of the open workspace where Victor usually sat. The microphone was hidden inside my toolbox, its battery able to last the entire day. About 30 minutes later, while I was pretending to be busy myself with the pipes, Victor appeared. In person, he fit exactly the type Paula had once described as having a successful air about him. A perfectly tailored gray suit, a wine-colored tie, neatly combed salt and pepper hair, and a smile dripping with overconfidence. Another man approached, likely a trusted associate. They stood just a few feet from the camera, completely unaware they were being recorded. "I have already moved all her money into my account," Victor said in a low, self-satisfied tone. "Tomorrow morning, I will go to the bank to withdraw a part of it, and the rest will disappear before anyone has a chance to ask questions." The other man chuckled. "The plumber's wife, right?" Victor shrugged. "Paula, she thinks this is an investment." All I had to do was say a few words about doubling her returns, and she was ready to sign the check. It took her a lifetime to save that much, and it will only take me a few weeks to spend it. Hearing this, I felt my grip tighten around the wrench until my knuckles turned white. But I forced myself to stay still. This conversation was worth more than any outburst. I finished the job, offered a casual goodbye, and left the building. Back at the workshop, the first thing I did was extract the data from the camera and microphone, saving it to two separate hard drives. The footage was so sharp you could see Victor lift his coffee cup, and the audio caught every word as clearly as a blade slicing through. That afternoon, I got a call from Mr. Jameson, an old client whose entire plumbing system I had replaced 5 years earlier. His voice was tight with worry. "Jack, do you know anything about a real estate broker named Victor Hayes?" I listened without interrupting. "He sold me a lot south of town, said the building permits were in process. I put down $50,000 from my retirement fund as a deposit. Now I cannot reach him, and his office says the project is delayed. Jack, I think I have been scammed." Those words were the final piece I needed. There was no doubt anymore, sir. Victor was a con man, and Paula, whether she realized it or not, had helped him use the money that should have belonged to Luke. That evening, I sat alone in the kitchen, the warm yellow light falling across the wooden table. In front of me was the hard drive holding the recording, copies of the customer's receipts, and a sheet of paper with the names of the people I would contact next. The plan was not yet complete, but the foundation was there. Direct evidence of Victor receiving money from Paula, proof of his intent to steal it, and another victim willing to testify. Paula came home late, the scent of perfume and alcohol clinging to her coat. She saw me and hesitated briefly, then smiled. "You are still up." I nodded, doing a few things. She did not know that from this moment forward, every step she and Victor took would lead them toward one place. The trap I was building piece by piece, like installing a brand new plumbing system without them ever knowing it was there. I knew that on my own, I could not bring down someone like Victor. Plumbing had taught me that if you want to handle a complex system, you need the right tools and the right skills. In this case, my tools would be the law and the press. The first person I went to was Harry Collins, a local attorney I had known since repairing the pipes in his office a few years earlier. Harry was in his 50s, broad-shouldered, with a deep, deliberate voice that seemed to weigh every word. I met him at a diner by the harbor, carrying my laptop and the hard drive with the audio and images from Victor's office. After watching, Harry sat in silence for a few seconds. "Jack, this is direct evidence of intent to misappropriate assets. If we combine this with testimony from another victim, we could open a civil case and possibly move into criminal charges." "I already have one," I said, telling him about Mr. Jameson, "and I suspect there are more." Harry nodded. "The first step is to gather enough victims and get them to sign on to a joint filing. But it has to be discreet. Do not let Victor catch wind of it." Next, I went to the one person in journalism I trusted, Megan Hart, an investigative reporter for the Astoria Chronicle. I had repaired the plumbing at her house before and knew she had no hesitation about digging into the dirtier stories in town. We met at a small cafe near the docks. I handed her a copy of the data. Megan opened her laptop, listening to the recording of Victor talking about Paula, while jotting notes, her brow furrowed. "You are giving me a big story, Jack," she said after watching it all. "But I need at least 3 victims willing to put their names and their stories out there. Then I can write a full investigation with the evidence and release it at the right time." I understood and was ready to find them. Through careful calls and quiet questions in the community, I found 3 more victims. A young couple who bought a lot in Cannon Beach through Victor lost $40,000 in deposit money. A widowed woman who sold her home to invest in a beachfront project, now left without money or a place to live. A middle-aged man was convinced to put capital into a resort that never existed. All 4, including Mr. Jameson, agreed to sign the joint filing after I played them the recording. Some had tears in their eyes, others clenched their jaws in anger. They all wanted justice, and they believed I could lead them to it. To protect everything I had gathered, I created a secure folder on a cloud service, naming it for Luke, Truth. Inside, I divided it into clear sections: audio evidence, recordings from Victor's office, photo evidence, images from Facebook, hotel receipts, fake contracts, victim statements, handwritten and recorded testimonies from the 4 victims, financial records, bank statements, payment receipts, withdrawal slips, legal drafts, The prepared joint lawsuit ready to be filed at the right time. I set a complex password and gave one copy to Harry, one to Megan, and kept an offline copy in the workshop safe. If one copy was destroyed, two more would remain intact. The plan was coming into focus. We would stay silent until the day Victor and Paula signed a deal to sell a large lot to an out-of-state investment group. According to Megan's source, the signing was set for Tuesday morning at Victor's office, with the deal worth nearly $500,000. That is when he thinks he has won the biggest, Megan said, her eyes lighting up. And that is when the counterpunch will land the hardest. Harry agreed. As soon as the contract begins, we will simultaneously file the joint lawsuit and hand over all evidence to the police and the district attorney. Megan will put the story online immediately. The legal and media pressure will choke him. I pictured Victor signing the deal, camera flashes popping, only for the police to walk in with an arrest warrant. Not because I wanted a spectacle, but because I wanted Paula to witness it, to see clearly that the man she trusted had dragged her to the bottom. Over the following days, I worked in the shop while quietly coordinating with Harry and Megan. Every night I checked the For Luke truth folder, adding anything new. Some nights I stayed up late, listening to the recording of Victor talking about Paula over and over, reminding myself why I had to see this through. Paula kept up her client meetings, unaware that the net was tightening. Luke was busy with finals, and I tried to keep him out of the storm until it was over. The night before the action, I drove to the beach and sat on a wooden bench, watching the waves. I thought about the 25 years behind me, the long days spent earning every dollar for Luke's fund, the freezing winters made warm by family. Now everything was different. But one thing had not changed. I would not let anyone take away my son's future. Tomorrow, everything would break open, and this time I would be the one holding the valve, deciding when and where the water would flow. Tuesday morning in Astoria was heavy with gray clouds pressing low over the surface of the Columbia River. I woke early, brewed a cup of strong black coffee, and sat watching the clock. 8:15. 45 minutes until Victor and Paula's contract signing was set to begin. My phone buzzed. It is a text from Megan. The article is queued to go live at 9:05. Be ready. I put on a dark blue jacket, pulled on my old baseball cap, and drove to the parking lot across from the building housing Hayes and Partners' office. I parked in a shaded corner with just enough of a view to see the main entrance without drawing attention. 8:55. A gleaming black SUV pulled up to the curb. Paula stepped out wearing a navy dress, her hair softly curled, and brand new heels. She smiled at Victor, who stood waiting inside the lobby, holding a thick folder, 9 o'clock. Through the glass doors, I saw them greet a group of 3 men in suits, likely the out-of-state investors. The mood appeared warm, all handshakes and small talk. A secretary pouring coffee. 9:05. I unlocked my phone and refreshed the Astoria Chronicle site. Megan's piece was front and center, exposing the Hayes real estate scam, evidence, testimonies, and the victims list. Below the headline was a photo of Victor on the empty lot beside Paula, along with an excerpt from the recording where he bragged about moving money from the plumber's wife into his account. I took a sip of coffee, eyes fixed on the glass doors. 9:10. The office doors swung open. 2 plainclothes officers stepped inside, followed by a representative from the district attorney's office. One of the officers pulled handcuffs from his belt. Victor stiffened, then forced a strained smile as he was asked to stand. The investors looked bewildered. Paula took a step back, her lips moving as if to ask a question. 9:12. Victor was turned around, both wrists cuffed with a sharp metallic click. One officer began rating him his rights. Paula glanced toward the DA's representative, but was quickly escorted into a side room to cooperate with the investigation. Through the glass, I watched the constant air of confidence drain from Victor's face, replaced by anger and confusion. Paula had gone pale, clutching her handbag as if it were the only solid thing left to hold. My phone buzzed again, a message from Harry. The joint lawsuit is filed. All 4 other victims have submitted individual claims. The DA's office has received the full For Luke truth package. A second message from Megan. The site is overloaded with traffic. The audio and photos are spreading across social media. I sat in the car watching the chaos inside. The investors left, clearly canceling the deal. The secretary was hurriedly packing up paperwork. Officers were sealing cabinets with evidence tape. When Victor was let out, he lifted his head, his eyes scanning the parking lot. I could not tell if he recognized me. I was deep in the seat, cap pulled low. It did not matter. Paula emerged next, walking beside a female officer. She was not cuffed, but her expression was unsettled. At the threshold, she paused for a few seconds, as if searching for someone. I stayed still. There was no need for a loud confrontation. I had chosen to let the law and the truth do the talking. 9:45. The building was nearly empty. Evidence tape stretched across the glass doors. I shut off my phone, started the engine, and drove along the river road. The sea breeze slipped through the open window, carrying the taste of salt. I felt lighter, as if I had just removed a corroded section of pipe from the system and replaced it with something clean and sound. No more leaks, no more filth flowing through my home. That afternoon, the local news aired footage of the arrest. Victor's face filled the screen beneath the caption, Astoria real estate broker charged with fraud and embezzlement. Below it, the list of charges: fraud, forgery, money laundering. The closing lines of the broadcast read, several victims have filed suit, leading to the indefinite shutdown of Hayes and Partners projects. I switched off the TV and sat at the kitchen table. Luke came home from school, saw me, and asked, "Did you hear the news?" I nodded. He did not know every detail, but he understood enough to know that Victor and his mother would face the consequences. That night, after Luke went to his room, I stepped out onto the porch with a mug of coffee. From here, I could see the distant glow of the office building, now dark and empty. I thought about Paula, about the choices she had made, and about this day. I did not feel triumph or gloating. What I felt was quiet, the kind of quiet you hear when the water stops leaking after you have closed the right valve and replaced the right fitting. The plan had worked without a shout, without a punch. Just the truth, patience, and a few people who believed in justice. Victor Hayes' trial took place in early autumn at the Clatsop County Courthouse. Over 3 days, the prosecutor presented the evidence one by one. The recording of him bragging about moving money from Paula, fake real estate contracts, bank records, the testimonies of 4 victims, all drawn from the For Luke truth folder. Victor sat in the defendant's box, the suit that once made him look successful now rumpled. For the first time, there was no confidence in him. When the judge read the verdict, the courtroom fell completely silent. Defendant Victor Hayes is hereby sentenced to 18 years in prison on charges of fraud, forgery, embezzlement, and money laundering. In addition, the defendant is ordered to repay in full all funds taken from the victims. He lowered his head and said nothing. Sitting in the back row, I felt as though I had finally replaced the leaking section of pipe. The justice system had tightened the fittings and fixed the damage. As for Paula, the divorce moved faster than I expected. My lawyer and the court agreed. She lost all access to family accounts and was removed from ownership of both the shop and the house. More importantly, the court awarded me full custody of Luke, citing her dishonest financial behavior and indirect involvement in Victor's criminal activity. Paula was given limited visitation rights, with advance notice required to me or my attorney. I did not feel joy reading that judgment, only a quiet relief mixed with regret. 25 years of life together had ended with a stack of divorce papers and a cold red stamp. Recovering Victor's assets took several months. Most of what he had stolen was returned to the victims. One day I received an envelope from Harry. Inside was a reimbursement note for $82,000, exactly the amount from Luke's college fund Paula had withdrawn. I remember holding that check. It was not the money itself, it was the meaning. It was proof that given time and effort, what has been taken can be reclaimed if you are patient enough and know how to fight back. Around the same time, Luke received his good news. A letter from the university confirmed his acceptance, along with a partial scholarship for his academic and community work. With the returned funds, he could cover tuition, housing, and even have a cushion for the years ahead. The day Luke got the letter, he stood in front of the shop, envelope held high, grinning. "Dad, I did it." I hugged him, feeling the weight of the past months suddenly lighter. The media kept covering Victor's case for weeks after it ended. Megan published a follow-up, highlighting the courage of victims who spoke out and the power of preserving evidence. My name never appeared in the article, just as we had agreed. I preferred to stay in the background, where I belonged. Paula left town shortly after the divorce was finalized. I heard she moved to Portland, working as an accountant for a small company. Luke did not ask much about her, and I did not push him. One evening, as we sat on the porch looking out at the river, Luke said, "Dad, thanks for not giving up." I smiled. I just did what had to be done. You are the one who has to keep moving forward and use this chance to build your own life. He nodded, eyes older than his 17 years. I knew he had learned the most important lesson. No one has the right to take your future without paying the price. On the last day of the trial, as Victor was escorted to the prison van, I stood in the crowd. He glanced around, but I do not think he saw me. I did not need him to. Justice is not about standing in front of someone and declaring you have won. Justice is when the truth does its work and the guilty face the consequences. I turned away and walked toward my truck. Work was waiting, customers still needed help, and Luke had to prepare for his first semester. Life would go on, but this time there were no more leaks in our system. That winter, when the cold winds from the Pacific swept into Astoria, I completed something I had been planning for a long time. I used part of the reimbursement money to create the Luke's Future Scholarship Fund. It was never about having anyone remember my name. I named the fund after my son because he was the reason I started everything, to protect his future. The goal was simple: to help students in our town who had the ability and drive to study but lacked the financial means. I knew the feeling of saving every dollar, hoping one day my child would have the chance for a decent education. And I knew what it felt like when that hope was almost stolen. For the launch, Luke and I chose the community library. The meeting room was small, decorated with photographs of the Columbia River and the harbor. Megan came too, not as a reporter but as a friend. Harry stood in the corner, smiling as I gave a short speech about why the fund existed. "We cannot change the past," I said, "but we can make sure the children here have a future that is protected." The applause was not loud, but it was warm. Luke stood next to me, his expression a mix of pride and quiet embarrassment. A few weeks later, we received the first applications: a senior whose father had passed away and whose mother worked as a waitress, a boy from a Mexican family whose parents labored in the fish plant but who dreamed of attending a technical university, a boarding school student from the local indigenous community with an exceptional talent for mathematics. Each story reminded me why I had been so determined in those past months. One afternoon, when work at the shop finished early, Luke and I went to the docks. The winter sky was gray but dry. Fishing boats were moored, their ropes creaking in the wind. We stood side by side, hands in our coat pockets, watching the water ripple. "Luke," I said, "there is something I want you to always remember. No one has the right to take away your future without paying the price." He looked at me and nodded slowly. "I know, Dad. And I also know that if someone ever tried to do that to someone else, I would not stay silent." We stood there for a while longer, listening to the woes and the cry of gulls. As the winter sun began to set, casting a pale gold light over the river, I realized I had come full circle, from loss and anger to calm and rebuilding. Things were not the same as before. Maybe they were better. Luke was about to start a new journey, and so was I. The Luke's Future Fund was more than a scholarship. It was a reminder to both me and this town that silence in the face of wrongdoing only makes it stronger. On the drive home, Luke asked, "Dad, if things hadn't worked out, if we hadn't gotten the money back, what would you have done?" I smiled faintly. I would have found another way, but I would not have sat still. You know that when a pipe is leaking, you find the leak and fix it. Letting it run means letting the whole system fail. He smiled and turned to look out the window, where the harbor lights had just come on. That night, I wrote one last line in the back of my old work notebook. "If the person stealing your child's future is family, will you choose silence or action?" Then I closed the book, turned out the light, and knew that both Luke and I already had the answer.